It is my absolute pleasure to introduce sociologist Ruha Benjamin from Princeton University. I'm excited about Dr. Benjamin, not just because she's a fellow sociologist, though that doesn't hurt, but in short, her work is simply amazing. Dr. Benjamin is an associate professor of African American Studies and founder of the Just Data Lab. As Talmisha's already told us, her work investigates the social dimensions of science, medicine, and technology with a focus on the relationship between innovation and equity, health and justice, knowledge and power. Professor Benjamin is a recipient of numerous awards and fellowships, including the Princeton University Arthur Scribner Bicentennial Preceptorship, the American Council of Learned Society Sabbatical Fellowship, the Graduate Fellowship for the National Science Foundation, and the President's Award for Distinguished Teaching at Princeton. Bad researcher, bad teacher, bad scholar. Trifecta. Thank you, Dr. Benjamin. So Dr. Benjamin is the author of several publications: People, Science, Bodies and Rights on the Stem Cell Frontier in 2013, and Race After Technology, Abolitionist Tools for the New Jim Code in 2019, among other publications. I'm telling you, it's bad. Dr. Benjamin is presently working on a book manuscript, The Emperor's New Genes, on borders, belonging, and biopolitics. The title of her lecture today is The New Jim Code, Reimagining the Default Settings of Technology and Society. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Benjamin to the podium.
All right, good morning. Are we at afternoon yet? It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. It is an honor to be part of this amazing lecture series. The co-sponsors, the organizers, everyone behind the scenes that made this possible for us to gather in this room. To get started, just join me in acknowledging once again that the traditional land on which we gather is of the Lenape. Let's also acknowledge the intertwined legacies, the devastation of transatlantic slavery and settler colonialism, which contribute to the creation and continued wealth of this university and this nation. We acknowledge the reparations owed to Black and Indigenous communities and nations and the impossibilities of return for generations past. Let us also acknowledge the ancestors in the room today, including Marion Thompson Wright, as we fight together for better futures. We're alive in an era of awakening and mobilization to preserve this planet and all the beautiful creation that is no doubt worthy of the struggle. Ashe. So to begin, I have a pop quiz for you. Are you ready? And to do this, I want to use this 30 seconds while you're trying to think of the answer and not using your Google search on your phone to stretch, however you want to stretch, because it's not natural to sit that long. So do whatever you want, 30 seconds, and try to think who is the author of this quote. You may stand. We have guided missiles and misguided men. Introduce yourself to your neighbor, stretch, and think of this author. All right, let's come back together. Let me see if I have any educated guesses. Who do you think it is? Throw out a name, yes. Oh, you are waving at someone. Okay, see? That's dangerous, dangerous. All right, on this side, anyone know who the author is? Educated guess, just throw out some names. I'll do like cold, warm, and hot. Wait, what'd you say? Kennedy, warm. King, hot, hot, hot. So Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. We forget that in addition to racism, militarism and materialism were the triple evils. And whether we're talking about guided missiles or other types of automated systems, we have a very lopsided investment in terms of building up our technological prowess and underinvesting in our moral imagination and our social consciousness when it comes to technology. And so it's important for us to start this conversation about reimagining the default settings of technology and society to acknowledge that we're building on a tradition. That people who have cared about the plight of humanity, who have cared about social justice, have always cared about the role of technology in either enabling injustice or being a tool for liberation. So this is the tradition on which we build. And we can say this holds today. We still have guided missiles and misguided men. Many people have two different narratives of the role of technology in our lives. That it's going to save us or it's going to slay us. One of these, Hollywood loves, right? Slaying, right? All of the robot movies, the Terminators, etc. That's Hollywood's MO. But Silicon Valley loves to feed us the Kool-Aid that technology is going to save us. On the surface, these seem like opposing narratives. They seem on the surface to be in conflict, but they share an underlying logic. In the social sciences, we would call it a techno-deterministic logic, meaning technology is determining what's happening, and we are just the recipients, for good or bad. But there is a third way of understanding, and I would suggest a more accurate and empowering way of understanding our relationship to technology. It's not going to slay us. It's not going to save us. We have to understand that technology doesn't grow on trees. People design it and embed in it values, assumptions, worldviews. But at the moment, only a small sliver of humanity is doing all that designing. And so we have to understand, what does it mean to become stewards of technology and understand that technology should be a product of democratic participation, not just the output of a few that we all then have to live with. So for the next 30 minutes or so, I want us to carve out, to think about, to imagine, what is this third space where we are thinking about designing and embedding in our digital and physical infrastructures our highest values. And so to do that, we have to think about voice. Whose voice do we hear? For many people, the answer, the easy answer to the issues I'm going to describe is to say, well, the tech workforce just needs to be more diverse. And that's important. And what I say next is not to undermine the quest for diversifying the tech workforce by race, nationality, gender, and all the rest. But it's to say that diversity itself is not going to save us. I give you this example. What you see here is a computer scientist, a black man, who was also developing his own app. And he was considering changing up the voice of the AI in his app, because as we know, most of our digital assistants have a white feminized voice, right? Siri and all the rest. So he was like, well, what if my AI would sound more like me? That would be cool. That would be different. But ultimately, he decided not to. In his words, there's a kind of pressure to conform to the prejudices of the world. It would be interesting to have a black guy talk, but we don't want to create friction either. First, we need to sell products. That reminds us that you can have a diverse team. You can have a diverse workforce. But if the profit value overrides other types of values, we're going to be in the same place that we are today. But you might just have a black face talking to you or a black voice talking to you. And so we need to think together, yes, diversity, but we need to push ourselves further in terms of what a liberatory imagination vis-a-vis technology has to look like going forward into the future. With that, let me recount a recent experience I had being a nosy sociologist walking by two men at Newark International Airport. When I overheard one say to the other, "I just want someone I can push around, ... I didn't stick around to see how the sentence ended, but I could imagine all types of endings. It could be in the context of looking through resumes, deciding who to hire. I just want someone to push around at work. Or in the context of dating or marriage, I just want someone I can push around in my personal life. The desire to exercise power over others is a dominant mode of power that has been given new license to assert itself, a kind of power that requires others to be subordinate. But let us remember that is not the only mode of power. There are horizontal modes of power where my empowerment doesn't require you to be subordinate. And that's the power that we have to begin to resuscitate, because it's getting overshadowed by this dominant mode of power at the moment. So at the time I passed these two men, I was traveling to speak with students at Harvey Mudd College in Southern California, which is a STEM-oriented school, and my talk was going to be around issues of technology and power. And so when I overheard this conversation in the airport, I couldn't help but think of this advertisement from 1957 Mechanics Illustrated magazine. It says, "The robots are coming. And when they do, you'll command a host of push-button servants." And then it says, in 1863, Abe Lincoln freed the slaves, but by 1965, slavery will be back. We'll all have personal slaves again. Don't be alarmed. We mean robot slaves. So much going on this one little page, isn't there? We could talk about it for an hour. But for the sake of time, there are just two things I'm going to point out to you. The first is just to take note of this date, 1957, a time when those who were pushed around in the domestic sphere, wives, domestic servants, could no longer be counted on to, as it says, dress you, comb your hair, and serve you meals in a jiffy. Hence the desire to replace free and cheap labor in the home with push-button servants. The fact is, no technology is preordained, but rather grows out of a broader context that makes some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Perhaps even more telling is this one little word: we will all have personal slaves again. That one little word tells us something about the targeted audience of this ad. Certainly not those who are the descendants of people who were enslaved the first time. The imagined user is gendered, raced, and classed without gender, race, or class ever being mentioned. Code words, in this case, encode interlocking systems of inequality as part of the design process. Precisely by ignoring social reality, tech designers will almost certainly reproduce it. True in 1957, true today. With that, let me offer 3 provocations as a kind of trailer for the talk. And this way, if you get bored, you gotta leave early, get notifications on your phone, you know what I want you to know. So, the first point is this: racism is productive. Not in the sense of being good, but in the literal capacity of racism to produce things of value to some, even as it wreaks havoc on others. We're taught to think of racism as an aberration, a glitch, an accident, a bad apple, an isolated incident, in the backwoods, and outdated, rather than as innovative, systemic, diffuse, an attached incident, the entire orchard, in the ivory tower, forward-looking, productive. In my field of sociology, we like to say race is socially constructed, but we often fail to state the corollary that racism constructs. Secondly, I'd like us to think about the way that race and technology shape one another, because more and more people are accustomed to thinking about the social and ethical impacts of technology. But that's only half of the story. Social norms, values, structures all exist prior to any given tech development. So it's not simply the impact that we're looking at, but the social inputs that make some inventions appear inevitable and desirable. Which leads to a third provocation, that imagination is a contested field of action, not an ephemeral afterthought that we have the luxury to dismiss or romanticize, but a resource, a battleground, an input and output of technology and social order. In fact, we should acknowledge that most people are forced to live inside someone else's imagination. And one of the things we have to come to grips with is how the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are just the underside of elite fantasies about efficiency, profit, and social control. Racism, among other axes of domination, helps to produce this fragmented imagination where you have misery for some, monopoly for others. This means that for those of us who want to construct a different social reality, one that's grounded in justice and joy, we can't only critique the underside. We also have to wrestle with the deep investments, the desire even that many people have for social domination. I just want someone I can push around. That's the trailer. Now, let's turn to some specifics. We're gonna start with a relatively new app called Citizen, which will send you real-time crime alerts based on a curated selection of 911 calls. It also offers a way for users to report, live stream, and comment on purported crimes via the app. And it shows you incidents as red dots on a map so you can avoid particular areas, which is a slightly less racialized version of apps called Ghetto Tracker and Sketch Factor, which use public data to help people avoid supposedly dangerous neighborhoods. Now, most of you are thinking, what could possibly go wrong in the age of barbecue Becky's calling the police on black people, cooking, walking, breathing out of place? It turns out that even a Stanford-educated environmental scientist living in the Bay Area is an ambassador of the carceral state, calling the police on a cookout at Lake Merritt. To riff off of Claudia Rankine, the most dangerous place for black people is in white people's imagination. It's worth noting, too, that the app Citizen was originally called the less chill name Vigilante. And in its rebranding, it also moved away from encouraging people to stop crime, but now simply to avoid it. As one member of the New York City Council put it, crime is now at historic lows in the city, but because residents are constantly being bombarded with push notifications of crime, they believe the city is going to hell in a handbasket. Not only is this categorically false, he said, it's distracting people from very real public safety issues like reckless driving or rising opioid use that don't show up on the app. What's most important to our discussion is that Citizen and other tech fixes for social problems are not simply about technology's impact, but also about how social norms and structures, racial norms and structures, shape what tools are imagined necessary in the first place. So this dynamic is what I take up in two new books. The first one examines the interplay of race automation and machine bias as an extension of older forms of racial domination. The second is an edited volume, which explores the carceral dimensions of technology across a wide range of social arenas, from more traditional sites like policing and prisons, to less obvious contexts like the retail industry and the digital service economy. As just one example from this volume, a chapter by Madison Van Oort draws on her ethnography of worker surveillance in the retail industry, where the same companies pitching products for policing and imprisonment to the Department of Corrections are also pitching them to H&M and Forever 21 to surveil workers. And even as she shows how workers are surveilled well beyond the confines of their workplaces, to include even their online activity, Van Oort highlights how her coworkers use technology in ways that try to counter the experiences of alienated labor, what we might call duplicity at work. On this point, I'd like to push pause for just a minute and turn to science fiction as part of expanding our collective imagination. I'm going to show you a 3-minute clip from the film Sleep Dealers by Alex Rivera, which shows how global capitalism is ever ready to turn racialized populations into automata, into robots. Mexicans, in this case, not as migrant workers, but machines that work in the US without ever setting foot in this country. Okay, I'll describe it. It's okay. So what it shows is a factory where node workers, as shown here, plug into the system and put nodes in their arms and then put in contact lenses which transport them to the other side of the border, in which they carry out all types of work from agriculture, childcare, construction, and more. And what we see is that the tech is not only invasive, but it also allows unprecedented surveillance. So if a worker falls asleep for just a moment, the computer wakes her up, registers the lapse, and docks her pay. Amazon warehouses on steroids. Over the course of the film, we see memo crews starting to work at one such factory, which are called sleep dealers because workers often collapse of exhaustion when they're plugged into the network too long. In this way, the film reminds us how the fantasy of some is the nightmare of others, and that embodiment does not magically cease to matter with automation, but can actually become more intensified, intrusive, and violent. It's worth recalling that the etymology of the Czech word robot is drawn from the Slav robota, which means servitude, hardship. And as anthropologist Kathleen Richardson observes, robots have historically been a way to talk about dehumanization. Sleep Dealers also brings to life an idea that inspired the title of my edited volume, that technology captivates, fascinating, charming, and bewitching, while potentially subduing and subjugating people. To engage this tension, we have to pierce through the rhetoric and marketing of tech utopianism as we try to understand the duplicity of tech fixes, purported solutions that nevertheless reinforce and even deepen existing hierarchies. In terms of popular discourse, what got me interested in this tension in the first place was the proliferation of headlines and hot takes about so-called racist robots. There were a first wave of stories a few years ago that seemed to be shocked at the prospect that, in STS scholar Langdon Winter's terms, artifacts have politics. A second wave seemed less surprised. Well, of course, technology inherits its creators' biases. And now I think we've entered a phase of attempts to override or address the default settings of racist and sexist robots, for better or worse. And one of the challenges we face is how to meaningfully differentiate technologies that are used to differentiate us. Take, for example, a recent study. Racial bias in a medical algorithm favors white patients over sicker black patients, reports a study by Obermeyer and colleagues, in which the researchers were actually able to look inside the black box of algorithm design, which is typically not possible with proprietary systems. What's especially important to note is that the algorithm does not explicitly take note of race. That is to say, it is race neutral. By using cost to predict healthcare need, this digital triaging system unwittingly reproduces racial disparities because on average, black people incur fewer costs for a variety of reasons, including systemic racism. And in my review of the study by Obermeyer and colleagues, I argue that indifference to social reality on the part of tech designers and adopters can be even more harmful than malicious intent. In the case of this widely used healthcare algorithm affecting millions of people, more than double the number of black patients would have been enrolled in programs to help them stay out of the hospital if the predictions were actually based on need rather than cost. Race neutrality, it turns out, is a deadly force. This combination of coded bias and imagined objectivity is what I've termed the new Jim Code. Innovation that enables social containment while appearing fairer than discriminatory practices of a previous era. This riff off of Michelle Alexander's analysis in The New Jim Crow considers how the reproduction of racist forms of social control in successive institutional forms entails a crucial socio-technical component that not only hides the nature of domination, but allows it to penetrate every facet of our lives under the guise of progress. This formulation, as I highlight here, is directly related to a number of other cousin concepts, as I call them, by Brown, Broussard, Daniels, Eubanks, Noble, and others. And it's situated in a hybrid literature that I think of as race-critical code studies, and I would encourage further reading along these lines. This approach is not only concerned with the impacts of technology, but its production, and particularly how race and racism enter the process. Two works that illustrate this approach are Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression and Simone Brown's Dark Matters. And if I had more time, I had planned to dive a little bit into these to just give you a sense of the range of work that's happening in race-critical code studies. But for now, I'm going to continue by just unpacking this idea of the new Jim Code. There's 4 dimensions to it that follow along a kind of a spectrum. We start with engineered inequity, which names those technologies that explicitly seek to amplify social cleavages. They're what we might think of as the most obvious, less hidden dimension of the new Jim Code. You can kind of see the harm coming at you. Then we have default discrimination, which are those inventions that tend to ignore social cleavages and as such tend to reproduce the default settings of race, class, gender, and more. Here I want to highlight how indifference to social reality is a powerful force that's perhaps more dangerous than the racist boogeyman of old. Coded exposure highlights the underside of tech inclusion, how the invisibility or technological distortion of those who are racialized is connected to our hypervisibility within systems of surveillance. And then we have techno-benevolence, which names those designs that claim to address bias of various sorts, but may still manage to reproduce or deepen discrimination, in part because of the narrow way in which fairness is operationalized. For the next few minutes, I'm going to dive a little deeper into each with some examples. So when it comes to engineered inequity, there are many different types of social credit programs and different phases of prototype and implementation all around the world that exemplify this use of technology to codify hierarchies. So while the idiom of the new Jim Code draws on the history of racial domination in the US as a touchstone, our focus must necessarily reach beyond national borders to understand how social credit systems and other types of innovations are amplifying existing hierarchies. And so again, with more time, I'd like to just give you an idea of what's happening in the China context. But I think what's most alarming about it and how it links close to the new Jim Code is that it's recodifying a digital caste system. Residents of China's predominantly Muslim province are already being forced to download an app that aims to track, quote, terrorist and illegal content. The chief executive of one of the companies that pioneered the scoring system says that it will ensure that the bad people in society don't have a place to go, while good people can move freely and without obstruction. Innovation that enables containment. Indeed, it's not only the desire to move freely, but all the additional privileges that come with a higher score that make it so alluring. You get faster service, VIP access, no deposits on rentals or hotels, not to mention the admiration of friends and colleagues. But lest we're tempted to think that this is a problem, engineered inequity over there, it's an issue right here at home. Companies like Facebook, Google, Instagram already collect the type of data that's employed in China's social credit system. And I need to double check this, but I think Facebook may have already patented a scoring system, though the company hedges on whether it will ever develop it further. In fact, as this headline from a week ago says, graduates from HBCUs may be paying higher interest rates on student loans. In other words, going to a black school could negatively impact people's credit worthiness, a clear case of the new Jim Code. A similar pattern was observed for borrowers from Hispanic-serving institutions and community colleges. In short, engineered inequity is a problem in our own backyards. What sets China apart so far is that all those tracked behaviors are already being rated and folded into a, quote, citizen score that opens or shuts doors depending on one's record. Automated social credit systems make a broader principle of merit-based systems clear. Scores measure a person's ability to conform to established definitions of good behavior and valued sociality rather than any intrinsic value. Most importantly, I think the ideological commitments of dominant groups determines what gets awarded credit in the first place. This not only implicates race ethnicity, but depending on the fault lines in any given society, we're talking about it codifying class, caste, sex, gender, religion, and disability oppression, among others. The point is that multiple axes of oppression typically converge in a single score. So turning now to default discrimination, which reinforce inequities because tech designers aren't thinking about social life or social reality. They fail to seriously attend to the context. Take, for example, carceral tools that underpin the US prison industry as a key feature of the new Jim Code. At every stage of the process, from policing, sentencing, imprisonment to parole, automated decision systems are being adopted. A recent study by investigators at ProPublica, which some of you may be familiar with, examined the risk scores used to predict whether individuals were likely to commit another offense once paroled. They found that the scores, which were assigned to thousands of people in Broward County, Florida, were remarkably unreliable in forecasting violent crime, and they uncovered significant racial disparities and inaccuracies, the outputs of the algorithm, shall we say. But what's also concerning, I think, is how the system reinforces and hides racial domination by ignoring how racism shapes the inputs. For example, the surveys given to prospective parolees to determine how likely they are to recidivate includes questions about their criminal history, education and employment history, financial history, neighborhood characteristics, among many other factors. All of these variables have been structured in one way or another by racial domination, from job market discrimination to ghettoization. The survey measures the extent to which an individual's life has been impacted by structural racism without ever asking an individual's race. Colorblind codes may on the surface appear better than a biased judge or prosecutor, but crime prediction is better understood as crime production, because those who are making these forecasts are also the ones who are in the position to make it rain. Coded exposure, in turn, names the tension between ongoing surveillance of racialized people and calls for digital recognition and inclusion, the desire many people have to literally be seen by technology, as this image shows. But inclusion into harmful systems is no public good. Rather, the act of viewing something or someone may put the object of vision at risk. What I'd like to underscore is that it's not only in the process of being out of sight, but also in the danger of being too centered that racialized groups are made vulnerable, though not without creative resistance, as I'll come back to in just a moment. But first, I'm going to see if this video works.
Hello? Motion sensors. Motioning. Motioning. Please sense me.
One other thing. Lem mentioned that there's something weird going on with the motion sensors in the lab.
Oh, yeah. We replaced all the sensors in the building with a new state-of-the-art system that's going to save money. It works by detecting light reflected off the skin.
Well, Lem says it doesn't work at all.
Lem's wrong. It does work. Although there is a problem. It doesn't seem to see black people.
The system doesn't see black people?
I know. Weird, huh?
That's more than weird, Veronica. That's basically, well, racist.
The company's position is that it's actually the opposite of racist because it's not targeting black people, it's just ignoring them. They insist the worst people can call it is indifferent.
Nothing. We never should have let that white guy off.
We're 8 black men in an elevator. Of course the white guy's gonna get off.
Veronica? Oh, God, this looks way too aggressive.
No, it's okay. I think I know why you're all here. Well, most of you.
I have something prepared. Veronica, you are a terrific boss.
Thank you, Lem. I'll take it from here. Let me start by apologizing on behalf of Viridian for this inexcusable situation.
I laid into Veronica pretty good. I figured it was my only shot, so I took the gloves off.
Wow, that sounds great, Lem. Sounds like you gave the company a really strong message.
Oh, yeah. She said they're working 24/7 to make things right. Can believe this.
I know, isn't it great? We all get our own free white guys.
You like it?
Yeah. Hey, Ty's the best. He anticipates everything I need. Plus, he picked up my dry cleaning. Oh, and he got this kink out of my neck.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
My white guy sucks.
Well, maybe you're just not using yours right.
Yeah, maybe it's on you, dude.
Shut up, Stu.
I got the worst black guy.
It turned out Lem had also been thinking about the money issue, and he put together some interesting numbers to show us. And then, we all went to speak to management in a language they could understand, within a margin of error of plus or minus 1%. And so, if the company keeps hiring white people to follow black people, to follow white people, to follow black people, by
Thursday, June 27th, 2013.
every person on Earth will be working for us. And we don't have the parking for that.
All right, so the show brilliantly depicts how a superficial corporate diversity ethos, prioritization of efficiency over equity, and the default whiteness of tech development work together to ensure that innovation literally produces containment. The fact that black employees are unable to use the elevators, doors, water fountains, or turn the lights on is treated as a minor inconvenience in service to a greater good. This is the invisibilizing side of a process that sociologist Alondra Nelson describes as a dialectic between surveillance and neglect that characterizes black life vis-a-vis science and technology. Finally, some of the most interesting developments, I think, are those we can consider techno-benevolence that aim to address bias in various ways. Take, for example, new AI techniques for vetting job applicants. A company called HireVue aims to reduce unconscious bias and promote diversity in the workplace by using an AI-powered program that analyzes recorded interviews of prospective employees. It uses thousands of data points, including verbal and nonverbal cues like facial expression, posture, and vocal tone, and then it compares job seekers' scores to those of existing top-performing employees to decide who to hire and who to reject. The sheer size of many applicant pools and the amount of time and money that companies pour into recruitment is astronomical. So companies like HireVue can narrow the eligible pool at a fraction of the time and cost, and hundreds of companies worldwide have signed on, everyone from Goldman Sachs to Hilton, Unilever, Red Sox, Atlanta Public Schools, and the list goes on. Another value added, according to HireVue, is that there's a lot that a human interviewer misses that AI can keep track of to make, quote, data-driven talent decisions. After all, the problem of employment discrimination is widespread and well documented. So the logic goes, wouldn't this be even more reason to outsource decisions to AI? Well, a study by some of my colleagues in Princeton's computer science department examined whether a popular algorithm trained on human writing online exhibited the same racially biased tendencies that psychologists have documented among humans. In particular, they found that the algorithm associated white-sounding names with pleasant words and black-sounding names with unpleasant ones, which builds on a classic audit study using old-school resumes that found the same pattern of discrimination. So too with gender-coded words and names, as Amazon learned last year when its own hiring algorithm was found discriminating against women. Nevertheless, it should be clear why technical fixes that claim to bypass human biases are so desirable. If only there was a way to slay centuries of racist and sexist demons with a social justice bot. Beyond desirable, more like magical. Magical for employers, perhaps looking to streamline the grueling work of recruitment, but a curse for many job seekers. Whereas proponents describe a very human-like interaction, those on the hunt for jobs recount a very different experience. Applicants are frustrated not only by the lack of human contact, but also because they have no idea how they're being evaluated and why they're repeatedly rejected. As this headline puts it, your next interview could be with a racist robot, bringing us back to that problem space we started with. Though it's worth noting that some job seekers are already developing ways to subvert the system by trading answers to employers' tests and creating fake applications as informal audits of their own. In fact, one HR employee for a major company recommends that people slip the words Oxford or Cambridge into our resumes with invisible white text to pass the automated screening. In terms of a more collective response, a federation of European trade unions called UNI Global has developed a charter of digital rights for workers, touching on automated and AI-based decisions to be included in bargaining agreements. So now for the next few minutes as I wrap up, this is the part of the talk where we think about what seems to be need not be in terms of all of the ways that people are resisting and reimagining this new Jim Code. Another development that keeps me hopeful is that tech workers themselves have increasingly been speaking out against the most egregious forms of corporate collusion with state-sanctioned racism. For example, thousands of Google employees condemned the company's collaboration on a Pentagon program that uses AI to make drone strikes more effective. And a growing number of Microsoft employees are opposed to the company's ICE contract, saying that, quote, "As the people who build the technologies that Microsoft profits from, we refuse to be complicit." And I would encourage you to check out the hashtag #TechWon'tBuildIt to get a sense of this growing movement. And as this article published by Science for the People reminds us, contrary to popular narratives, organizing among technical workers has a vibrant history, including engineers and technicians in the 60s and 70s who fought professionalism, individualism, and reformism to contribute to radical labor organizing. The current tech workers movement, which includes students across our many institutions, can draw from past organizers' experiences in learning to navigate the contradictions and complexities of organizing in tech today, which includes building solidarity across race and class. For example, when the predominantly East African Amazon workers in the company's Minnesota warehouses organized a strike on Prime Day to demand better work conditions, engineers from Seattle came out to support. In terms of civil society, initiatives like Data for Black Lives and the Detroit Community Tech Project offer an even more expansive approach. The former brings together people working across a number of agencies and organizations in a proactive approach to tech justice, especially at the policy level. And the latter develops and uses technology rooted in community needs, offering support to grassroots networks doing data justice research, including hosting what they call discotheques, which stands for Discovering Technology, which are these multimedia mobile neighborhood workshop fairs that can be adapted in other locales. And if I had a little more time, I'd tell you more about the specific initiatives being sponsored and supported by Data for Black Lives. Another very tangible abolitionist approach to the new Jim Code is the Digital Defense Playbook, which introduces a set of tools for diagnosing, dealing with, and healing the injustices of pervasive and punitive data collection and data-driven systems. The playbook contains in-depth guidelines for facilitating workshops, plus tools, tip sheets, and reflection pieces, crafted from in-depth interviews with communities in Charlotte, Detroit, and LA, with the aim of engendering power, not paranoia, when it comes to technology. What seems to be need not be. And finally, when it comes to rethinking STEM education as a ground zero for reimagining the relationship between technology and society, there are a number of initiatives underway. I'll just mention one very concrete resource that you can download since we're here at a university, called the Advancing Racial Literacy in Tech Handbook, developed by some wonderful colleagues at the Data and Society Research Institute in New York. So the aim of this intervention is threefold: to develop an intellectual understanding of how structural racism operates in algorithms, social media platforms, and technologies not yet developed; an emotional intelligence concerning how to resolve racially stressful situations within organizations; and a commitment to take action to reduce harms to communities of color. The fact is, data disenfranchisement and domination has always been met with resistance and reimagining, in which activists, scholars, and artists have sharpened abolitionist tools that employ data for liberation. This is a tradition in which, as Du Bois exclaimed, one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were being lynched, murdered, and starved. From his modernist data visualizations representing the facts of Black life, to Ida B. Wells Barnett's expert deployment of statistics in the Red Record, there's a long tradition of employing and challenging data for justice. Towards that end, the late critical race scholar, Harvard professor Derek A. Bell, encouraged a radical assessment of reality through creative methods and racial reversals, insisting that to see things as they really are, You must imagine them for what they might be, which is why the arts and humanities are so vital to this discussion and this movement. One of my favorite examples of what we might call a Bellian racial reversal is this parody project that begins by subverting the anti-Black logics embedded in new high-tech approaches to crime prevention. Instead of using predictive policing techniques to forecast street crime, the white-collar early warning system flips the script by creating a heat map that flags city blocks where financial crimes are likely to occur. The system not only brings the hidden but no less deadly crimes of capitalism into view, but includes an app that alerts users when they've entered high-risk areas to encourage citizen policing and awareness. Taking it one step further, the development team is working on a facial recognition program to flag individuals who are likely perpetrators. And the training set used to design the algorithm includes the profile photos of 7,000 corporate executives downloaded from LinkedIn. Not surprisingly, the average face of a criminal is white and male. To be sure, creative exercises like this are only comical when we ignore that all of its features are drawn directly from actually existing proposals and practices in the real world, including using facial images to predict criminality. By deliberately and inventively upsetting the status quo in this manner, analysts can better understand and expose the many forms of discrimination embedded in and enabled by technology. So here's my final proposition. If it is the case that inequity and injustice is woven into the very fabric of our society, then each twist, coil, and code is a chance for us to weave new patterns, practices, and politics. Its vastness will be its undoing. That is, the vastness of the problem will be its undoing once we accept that we are pattern makers. The decision is ours. Will we simply follow the patterns of social behavior and social order that we have inherited and continue to embed them in our physical and digital infrastructures? Or will we build on critical intellectual traditions that have continually developed insights and strategies grounded in justice? My hope is that we all find ways to build on this tradition. Thank you for your attention.
Ruha Benjamin, please. Get out of the room. Thank you so much. Okay, I'm going to say something about lunch, but before I say something about lunch, wanted to just express a few words of deep appreciation for two staff people who have put in the most amount of time to make this whole event possible. I think they're running around, so they're not in the room to be acknowledged directly, but I should just say Marion Mien and also Jessica Hernandez, and also our new staff person, Claudia Sepulveda, have done an amazing job to kind of pull this together. So I hope you can kind of express your appreciation for them.